Hi, and welcome to the Storied Human. This is Lynn Thompson. I have a fun interview today with Rose Holbrook. She's owner of Yogi Scopes in Asheville, North Carolina, and she is on a mission to share what she's learned with other people. She's very inspiring. She works with a lot of diverse clients, and I'm very excited to talk to her. So welcome, Rose.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's just so good to have you. So we met on another course, which is a cool way to meet somebody. And we're trying to grow our email subscription list and learn how to do that. So you're doing that for your business. Tell me just a little bit about your business and how it began, how you started it.
You want the long version or the short version?
I want whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay. My business now is called Yogi Scopes, and that is a play on words because I like to be punny. It's a play on words for like yoga horoscopes, because the crux of what I do is personalized yoga, and astrology is just like an interest of mine. It's actually a passion of mine. It's something I love. So I learned Vedic astrology. And so one thing I kind of do and teach is Vedic astrology, but for the purpose of teaching folks how to personalize their yoga practice based on whatever, astrological energies at play is one of the things, but also Ayurveda. So the seasons, the natural cycles of life. So using just everything yoga philosophy has to offer, I'm trying to learn myself because I love it. I'm passionate about it, and package it up in a way that folks can learn how to apply it to their life. Because I think that Instagram and whatever has given us this idea that yoga is about like skinny white chicks and contortionist poses, but it's about so much more than that. And personalizing a yoga practice is about more than just an hour-long vinyasa or whatever, like yoga practice you would do at a yoga studio or a gym or whatever. There's like way more to it than that. And so that's kind of what I do now. It's yoga therapy. I'm in training to become a yoga therapist, so I can't call myself a yoga therapist just yet for legal reasons. But what I do is yoga therapy, therapeutic yoga.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, thanks.
I love it. Now, how did you find that? Like, most people don't know about Vedic astrology, and you're connecting it to yoga, which is really cool.
So that's actually another kind of like mission I have, is to teach other folks that are into yoga or yoga teachers that want to incorporate their like astrology into their teaching about Vedic astrology. Because from what I've seen, even folks here in Asheville, if they do incorporate astrology, it's Western astrology. And that's frustrating to me just because, I don't know, I guess I'm pedantic or something, but I think I'm like, yoga has a system of astrology. They're made from the same place, like they pair way better together. And so I found that I just heard about it in my yoga teacher training that I did in 2017. But I just briefly heard about it then. I was always interested in astrology. I just didn't know that Western or Vedic astrology was a thing. I studied Western astrology like my entire life. Like I was into it. Even growing up. And then I just heard about Vedic astrology in my first yoga teacher training, my 200-hour. And so then I was like, okay, add that to the list of things I need to learn. And finally, I learned it over the course of since then until now. Really in 2020 is kind of when I picked up and started doing it more professionally. Like I felt like I had learned enough to do it more professionally. Yeah. So
Yeah, I love that impulse to put the Eastern with the Eastern, right? Two Eastern things instead of Eastern Western. Is it radically different, the astrology?
Not
the Eastern
really. It has a lot of stuff in common, but so one of the big differences I like is that it feels less fatalistic. Just the culture of Vedic astrology feels more like we're going to look holistically at your birth chart and what that means, the implications of that as like you as a person. And these are your karmas, if you will, like your the hand you've been dealt in life, like the lessons you have to work through. And you can either learn your lesson and transform yourself in your life, or you cannot, and you can be stuck in whatever hand you've been dealt and you can be pissed about it. But I feel like Western astrology is more like, oh, well, I'm a Gemini, so I'm such and such, and it's kind of like, I am this way. It's a more fatalistic mindset. And Vedic astrology, like yoga, has a more holistic culture.
That is so interesting. I've been interested in astrology my whole life, but mostly, like you said, it's Western. I didn't even realize it was Western until recently. There's a wonderful podcast by someone I know called Rooted in Starlight, and I have learned so much from her. Her first name is Trish. Morrissey is her last name. I've learned so much from her because she sort of brings it down to earth for us and kind of gives you tips about what to look out for and feelings you're going to have. So I think that's so useful. And I really love the idea that you're talking about, where it's not cut and dry. It's not either or. It's not like, I think that's so Western, like you are this or that. It's like black and white. And I love that you're attracted to this other thing. So how did you get into yoga? I love how it just became more and more of a thing for you. And now you've turned it into a thriving, really beautiful business. I love what you do. But how did you first figure that out, that maybe I should do this?
So I'm going to go way back because it's an important part of the story. I think I started doing yoga in a gym when I was like 15. Like my mom would drive me to the gym. It was like my hobby after school. I was a gym rat. Like I would just hang out at the gym. I think so. This is like addiction is part of my story. And I look back on it and I'm like, before I was addicted to drugs, I was totally addicted to the gym. Like I would spend 2-3 hours there. Like that was in high school and I was a swimmer. So when I had swim practice, I would do that. But when it wasn't swim season, because I was never like a year-round swimmer or anything, I would just spend all this time at the gym. And so finally one day I tried a yoga class just at this local gym. And so I sense this sometimes in yoga studio communities, they kind of like look down on gym yoga. But I think personally, I'm like, gym yoga is fine yoga. It's great. Like there are some teachers there at gyms that like are just getting their start or whatever. But anyway, gym yoga, like that's how I got started when I was 15. And I practiced yoga throughout the rest of high school because I just immediately fell in love. I had this teacher that, not with the teacher, but with the practice. I had this teacher that she was like super strong, but she was also like really nimble and just like, I thought she was awesome and I wanted to be like her. And so I did a lot more yoga. And then I ended up going to college and I still practiced yoga, like, just at the rec center when I was in college. But during college, I found myself actually so my high school sweetheart boyfriend, I started dating him like junior year of high school or whatever. And I was still dating him up until college. I promise there's a point to this. He was in the military and he like hurt his foot or something in the military. So he ended up on painkillers and he went down this like horrible road. Like I'm of the opiate epidemic generation. Like I'm a millennial. Almost everybody I know from high school is like, has some story related to like opiates,
So
like
hard. Yes.
The people in my peer group are very much the ones impacted by the opiate epidemic, and so I fell into that as well because this guy I was dating, like I was in college, we were in a long distance relationship because he still lived in my hometown and I ended up going away to college. And so for the year I lived far away, I was pretty good and I was doing yoga and I was in college but my family has this, they're a bunch of like doctors and lawyers and accountants and whatever, like, my brother's an engineer, my mom's a lawyer, my granddad's a doctor, like, super like we go to college in this family, we get real degrees, like
professional. Yeah.
And that was the culture I was raised in. So I was like, I'm going to go and get a real degree. Like if I could have done what I wanted to at 18 years old, I would have pursued probably like exercise science because they had that, where I started out for undergrad, but that didn't seem like a real enough degree. I didn't really understand exercise science at the time. Now I'm like, that totally would have been a good option. I could have been a PT or something and my family would have been happy with that. But no, I decided through this freshman seminar class project thing where they were like, figure out your dream job or whatever. And so somehow I landed on engineering. And because I was really good. I mean, I took calculus in high school. I took physics in high school. Like I was really good. I still am really good at math and science. Like I didn't fail out of engineering school. Even through my addiction, I was like on drugs and working in engineering school and still getting straight A's because I'm nerdy like that. But I landed on engineering, and because I thought the school I was at, like I was looking at the options of majors they had, and they had one listed as pre-engineering. I didn't know that meant you were supposed to spend like 2 years there and then transfer schools. But then I found that out and I had already decided. So I was like, all right, I'm transferring. And it turns out the school I transferred to was closer to my hometown. So then I was closer to the drug use in this codependent relationship I was in. And because I was like super codependent, instead of breaking up with this person because he was down a bad path, I thought I could like fix him, you know, or whatever. I could help him.
A lot of us think that, right?
Yeah. And instead, I ended up just going down that same path too. And I ended up addicted to opiates. I was like using them intravenously, you know, like I was a junkie, you know, and I understand, like I've now since gotten a degree in health and wellness promotion, and there's this whole culture in the health world that's like person first language. Like we don't use words like junkie, but I was a junkie. I can say that because I was one. You know, and so
I hear you.
Yeah. Like
how old are you at this point?
At that point, I'm 28 now, but this was all going on when I was like 19, 20.
That's so young to have to battle that.
Yeah. And I was in engineering school at the time.
Yikes.
And I was like, it sounds wild, but I was a lifeguard because, you know, I was like always a swimmer. Okay. So it was my second year of college, I transferred because I learned in that, you know, honors class or whatever. I took the freshman seminar thing. It was, I could have stayed at the school I started at for 2 years, but I was like, you know what? I'm kind of a dive in headfirst kind of person anyway. I was like, let me go ahead and, I was eligible to transfer after one because I had just started with, you know, chemistry and physics because I figured I would want to go into something sciencey because I'm good at science or whatever. So I'd already taken the prerequisites, luckily, and I could transfer after one. So I'm like 19 years old, moving back to kind of my hometown, like the middle part of North Carolina. I did live in the city and my hometown was like a small town outside. So I was like 19, I moved back closer to home, closer to this, boyfriend I was super codependent on, and he had by this point pretty much wrecked his whole life on drugs. He had gotten kicked out of the Marine Corps, lost a bunch of jobs, gotten kicked out of school. Like he was not doing well. And
oh my gosh,
because I was super codependent, I didn't, you know, I thought I could fix him, right? Like I was trying to help. I was like, you know, thinking if I could inspire him because I was going into engineering school and I was doing good stuff with my life. And really what happened instead is like, he was kind of just dragging me down. And so I was working really hard. Like I worked and I was in school and I ended up, just like once I tried it, because so like I mentioned earlier in the story that like, I noticed, like, I'm not blaming him for the fact that I ended up on drugs. Like I had tendencies of addiction before that. Like I can look back and see I was kind of like addicted to exercise, addicted to the gym, but it wasn't a bad thing. Like it was good for me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And you
like,
can see that now looking back.
Yeah. Like I just have an addictive personality. I have addicted tendencies. And which by the way, there's a lot of indicators of that in my astrology chart, which is what I love. Astrology is super validating. Anyway, so, and I had like dabbled in drugs in high school, but I was like an honor roll student. So like, I didn't think it was fine, but that's why I was desensitized to the drugs. And I ended up eventually trying them. And it was, you know, the rest is history. Like I got addicted to IV opiates and went down that road. Was definitely a part of the opioid epidemic. I like overdosed, you know, like all these things that should have like woke me up quickly. Like I woke up in an ambulance once. I try not to focus too much on like the trauma of my story because, I'll get into this in a little bit because like I ended up, to skip ahead, I ended up like finding my way back to yoga, and that's how I got off of drugs eventually. Like, I mean, I went down that path but what I've learned is that you don't have to tell the battle stories over and over again.
Yes.
Like that's
yes.
Traumatizing.
That's like reliving and re-traumatizing. Yeah. I read that. And it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I learned that later in the future, but that's very much the culture of like AA and NA. They're like, you have to tell it to like heal it or whatever. And that's actually like really bad advice, but it's more nuanced than that. Because sometimes you do have to sort through things, but just like telling it in a public setting is just, it doesn't actually serve a whole lot of good. But I do like tell some of it just to illustrate like I was all the way out there. Like I recognize that also, I mean, like I'm a white girl that comes from a family of privilege. Like my family is a bunch of doctors and lawyers and stuff. But so that's one of those things I experienced. Like I went to a 2-year-long inpatient rehab. I ended up at one of those in 2015. So this was a couple years later. I spent about 3 years being like really strung out, but I was also in engineering school that whole time.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're what we call a functional addict. And
I was.
And totally. There are people like in my family, I have the same thing. Yeah. My father was an alcoholic and he was functional the whole time.
I might catch flack if any of my family like listens to this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. There are some functional alcoholics in my family for sure.
And some of them don't have a clue. It's sort of like among a certain age group, it was just how you were raised and how you socialized. Yeah. And I don't think people even name it, Right. I hear you. I love how you make a difference between, we do have to give our problems words. We have to say it out loud to make it real, but we don't have to go over and over and over it. I think that's such a great point.
Yeah. Just all the trauma. That's a large part of the work I do now. So I'm sure we'll get more into that as we go and like more about what that means. But so I ended up in rehab. Like I went to jail, ended up in rehab. And it wasn't until I found myself in a worse abusive relationship after that one. An even worse one I found myself in. And it's a progressive disease, right? Like they say that, and it's like, it just keeps getting worse. And it did for me. Found myself like living in my car and, but I had a car, you know what I mean? So it's like, anyway.
Yeah.
So I recognized like when I was in that rehab, there was some element among some of the other folks in there that were like, you're this like privileged little white girl. You don't really like belong here. And I was like, sticking needles in my arm. I think I kind of do.
Very like, good point. It doesn't matter, right? The problem is the same. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so that was like, I think I had to work through, and so I went to that rehab. And then afterwards I moved back home and I was clean. I had been clean for over a year. I tried to go back to engineering school. That was a dumb idea. They say the definition of insanity is like repeating the same thing over and over and expecting
a different result.
That was my third time after spending a year in rehab of dropping out, trying to get clean, and then going back after I got clean. And it was on that time that after being clean for a year or so, a little over a year, and I relapsed. And within like a week, I was, already, I hadn't lost my house or anything because I only relapsed for about, I was only using again for about 3 weeks. So it wasn't long enough to like miss rent or like whatever. So, I didn't like lose my place to live or my job or any of that time. But, I did end up with like a nasty infection and ended up in the hospital. So it was like, so it got bad again really fast, and that's kind of how it works. And so during that time, I also caught a charge. So that charge made me have to go to like drug court, which meant I had to go to an outpatient rehab, which that was the magic, was not necessarily the outpatient, although it was like I had a really good counselor there. So I like to emphasize that part, that like finding a good counselor is not easy, but if you do find a good one, it can be really beneficial. But it wasn't just the counseling. I also, because it was outpatient and I decided finally that that was my last hurrah with engineering school, I was like, let's not do that again. Clearly, like I wasn't in a relationship. Like there was nothing else pointing to my relapse except engineering school, So I was like, right. That's part of the problem. So I'm not going to do that anymore. So meanwhile, I'm dropping out of engineering for school for good. I'm working as a waitress and in outpatient rehab, which is like 3 hours a day, 3 times a week or something, to get my charge dropped, because it was my first drug related charge. Anyway, so I'm doing that. And because I was working and not going to school anymore, and like before I'd been used to I worked and went to engineering school. So I've always been the kind of person that like does a lot of stuff. So working part-time at a restaurant, I went ahead and got a gym membership at the Y. And excellent. I found my way back to working out a lot and doing yoga again at the Y in Raleigh, North Carolina, because that's where I lived at the time. And I figured out so it became apparent when I finished the outpatient program and I was doing really well, going to the gym and doing yoga. And I worked at a restaurant, so I worked nights. So I would just go to the gym and spend a couple hours at the gym in the morning and kind of like I did before I ever ended up on drugs. And it became apparent that yoga was a big piece of that no longer relapsing, and that yoga was kind of like my first love. I fell in love with it before I went to engineering school, and I was like, well, that was a big old flop. So I need something to do with my time instead. I'm going to while I'm figuring it out, I'm going to do this goal that I had a long time ago of pursuing a yoga teacher training, which is what I wanted to do when I was 17, but I didn't, because that doesn't count as a real career, but it does. Now I have made a career of it, and I've proved.
I love that. Yeah. And you found yoga again. It's so healing. It healed you.
Yeah. And I hear that from a lot of folks, a lot of people that do yoga, that not even if they weren't ever on drugs or whatever, yoga just heals. It does. And that's the sentiment I hear from a lot of people. And so being my nerdy self, I was like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I want to know why. Right. So I kind of so just to give more details of the story, I was, this was early 2017 now. So it was, spent a year in rehab from summer of 2015 to spring, early summer of 2016, went back to engineering school, fall of 2016, relapsed during midterms that October, got clean again in early November when I wound up in the hospital. And nobody was I was in the hospital by myself. That was really miserable. So I was like, this sucks. Don't want to do this anymore. Then my court date was coming up. And so over that till February is when I was in the outpatient, of 2017. And I also started dating then my now husband, who I have 2 children with. And we were kind of an anomaly because we knew each other from doing drugs. I mean, we're both from the same small town. So he was friends with my brother and stuff. But he's much older than me. He's 7 years older than me. So I didn't know him during school. I knew him afterwards when we were both on drugs and running in the same drug circles. So that's an anomaly. That doesn't usually happen, that people that are freshly clean like that start dating and stay clean. But here we are, 6 years later, married with a family and both very much clean. You know what I mean? So that worked out.
Team. Yeah. You're able to support each other. Sometimes that works. Yeah. I wanted to just say one small thing about the relapse, because I think people have the wrong idea about relapsing. Mm-hmm. It's totally normal. It's part of the process. It doesn't mean you failed. I see it all the time. And to a smaller degree, when I tried to quit smoking, it took me about 6 tries. And I tell people that and they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, because I got better each time at doing it. I figured it out each time. I got a little better, and I don't see it as a failure at all, because I've lived that smaller example.
Yes.
And I love that, we have to get that word out. People don't get it. Like, again, there's that either or Western thinking, right? It's like, oh, they relapsed. It's all over. They failed. Right. No.
Well, and that's part of, this is why, like, I hate to poo-poo on the anonymous, because it comes across that way when I say like the anonymous programs, because I did start out there, like going to meetings because that was like what you're supposed to do, and stuff. But just the culture, the shame culture of picking up a white chip is like really bad, really that just, you don't lose the progress you made, the healing progress you made, because just because, yes, like I was saying, like I relapsed for a few weeks after being clean for a year, and I got just as bad as I was instantaneously, like rather than it taking a few years like it did before when I first started. But when I got clean again, it's not like all that healing progress I had made was lost.
Exactly. Right? That's what I wanted to make sure we say.
Yeah, that's an important point for sure.
The journey is really about, well, it's very similar if you're starting a business, right? Like I was taught as a young person in my family, we were told, like, don't ever go in your own business. Uncle so-and-so did, and he lost his shirt. And, that whole idea that if you fail a little bit or you fail once, it's all over. And that's just, that's stinking thinking, to borrow a phrase from AA, and I've really had to like retool my thinking about it all, because we're on a journey and the failures are stepping stones, and we step on them and we learn and we keep going. So your story is really powerful that that you got it, and also that you ended up, like, your husband really understands it. If you're with somebody who gets it, you can really help each other. So that's cool.
Yeah. Well, and I think
that's a lot of living, by the way, for somebody who's 28.
Yeah. So that's what I like. I get that a lot, that I'm like I look young, I am young, and it's like, what could I know about? But I just was on the fast track to like,
a lot. Yeah. You know a lot.
So I went through a lot of hard stuff, and it was kind of miserable while I was in it. But I think also just say, like, what you mentioned about your brother and the family story about losing the business, like, our stories are so important. That's why I love what you're doing here with this podcast, because, we have our story, but then we also have our way that we conceptualize that and the way we think about that. And that can either be empowering or it can not. And you can always change the story. Like, you can't change the past story, but you can write a new story. Right.
I love that. Yes. And we have our stories that we've internalized, maybe from our family, that don't serve us anymore. And that's a big part of why I do this, so that we can look at those and go, that doesn't really work for me anymore. That's not me. So somebody else said that about me, or somebody else told me that. Like the whole money thing too. Like, I'm learning about mindset and money. And I was told, money doesn't grow on trees. And like, this is really negative kind of, scarcity mindset. And not that that's so terrible. My family they were trying to protect me. They were doing the best they knew at the time, but now we know differently. And it's really powerful to let go of some of those things and take a look. Like, some people are unconscious about what they've been told about themselves. They have those voices in their head. They think their thoughts, those are their thoughts, and the story is, I call it family myths. There's so many myths that we tell about our families.
Well, and like I was saying with my family, the story I was told was, you're going to go to college. I was told that from when I was like 5 years old. You're going to go to college. We get real degrees. And I ended up finishing my degree because I was 3 years through. I only had 30 credit hours left, like 1 year left when I dropped out of engineering school. So I was like, well, I need to get a degree. I should not let that go to waste. So I did end up getting a degree, but like, my husband, like I was mentioning, he did, I think, like 1 semester of college, and that wasn't for him. And so he went into a trade, and he makes more money than I do in his trade.
And probably loves it, right?
Yeah. And so he actually, because he is an entrepreneur, like, I don't know. So like, I was always kind of an entrepreneur too. I started my first business when I was like 16, anyway, that's another story for another day. But, so he kind of empowered me to start my own business as well. And that's so I'm like, for our children, I'm like very conscious that I'm not going to start them we have in North Carolina, the NC 529. It's like a college savings plan. I don't know if that's outside of the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, we have those too. Yep.
Do that, because I don't want, like, I'll start them a savings account, but not one that can only be used on college, because my husband and I decided for our kids that we don't care what they do as long as they're good people in life. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
he's been very successful at a trade. And he's very smart, but he was kind of told, because he was a rowdy kid, that he would never make it in college and he better go into construction. You know what I mean? So it's like those stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Those stories.
Yeah.
And
I'm
slotting,
like,
you know, putting you in a slot, right?
Yeah.
When you're very young, like, how would they know? Right.
Yeah. And so it's important, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell our children, you know, the stories that come from our family, like all that's very important. And
yeah.
So we're,
that's
as
powerful.
a parenting choice, kind of conscientious that we're not going to tell our children how to live their life.
Yeah.
As long as they're good people, you know, like we'll raise them.
They're going to get so much out of your example too.
Right. Totally.
You know, like you model, like I found I became a better person for my children. You know, I just was trying really hard to do the right thing and be the right person for them. I ended up becoming a better person. And I liked it. I like that transformation. And I mean, they're 23 and 26 now. And they say, well, we always knew we were loved.
Right.
And they're pretty, you know, you'll love that when you get to that point, because you're going to realize they got it, like they appreciate it. And you get compliments and it's like, okay, it was worth it then, all those years of worrying about what they were eating and where they were going and what I was saying. And, you know, it's not easy. I know it's not easy, but yeah, you're starting out great. I think you're starting out great. So, okay. So that's amazing to me. So you moved into this new venture, but I'm amazed too that you finished. You said, I'm going to finish that degree. So you have an engineering degree.
No, I don't. I got a degree in health.
Oh, I was like, so you changed the major.
Yeah. So I ended up pursuing my yoga teacher training. I moved back in with my mom so that I was no longer paying to rent a place with other college students in Raleigh. I just moved back in with my mom, and that was kind of like hard at 22 or whatever, but I did. And my mom's great, but so I moved back in with her, and I worked at the restaurant, and I went to the gym, and I saved up my money, and I paid for a yoga teacher training. And when I was deciding where I wanted to do my yoga teacher training, it was like $3,000. And so when I was used to like student loans and stuff, that was like no small feat to save up that $3,000. I mean, I was like I was living with my mom, so I didn't have rent, but I like to recognize that part of the story, that like I had some things that were easier because I do come from a privileged family, right? But like still I did it. And so I decided to do my yoga teacher training in Asheville, North Carolina, because I grew up my whole life in in the middle part of the state, and I've lived all over North Carolina through all my escapades in my early 20s. But I landed in Asheville because my then boyfriend, now husband, had moved here as well, also kind of on his own journey of getting clean and finding healing and whatever. But so I was a little bit chasing him. Like the yoga program I landed in was a fantastic one. It was a fantastic one. Asheville Yoga Center. I think it's better than any of the programs I at least could find at the time in Raleigh. So like I say, I moved here for yoga training, but really it was because I was chasing him as well. But that worked out. So so I landed here. I did my first yoga training, and in that yoga training, it was a year long. It was like kind of like a school year, but yoga trainings are on the weekends. So it was like one weekend a month from September to April, over 2017 to 18. So I did that, and I was working cleaning houses at the time. I ended up starting my own business, cleaning houses and cleaning vacation rentals. So that's another just like random business I've run. And we were super broke back then, but I did it. And we had to do this research project about yoga for trauma for my yoga teacher training, for the 200-hour training. We had to do any research project, and on any area of yoga that kind of lit us up. Right. And so I chose yoga for addiction, but meanwhile, I had also found out about Y12SR by Nikki Myers, the yoga of 12-step recovery. And I did that training, and that was cool. And I taught that for a little while, but I'm also just like, I don't do that anymore because I am so critical of the 12-step culture in general. So I just don't. I
mean, it's helped people, but it's an older paradigm.
Yeah. I'm not about it. So, and they kind of require that you like also they strongly suggest that you still have a sponsor and work the 12 steps yourself if you're going to teach that. So I was like, meh. And I had a lot of trouble finding anywhere in Asheville, surprisingly, that would allow me to use the space to teach that. So
Wow.
I just didn't for long. I taught a few, but I didn't do that for long. But anyway, I through that program though, I'm still in the same lineage as Nikki Myers in terms of yoga, like the Kripalu lineage and the Vini Yoga lineage for people that are deep in the yoga rabbit hole and know what that means. I'm still in that lineage, but very therapeutic lineage. So I ended up discovering that the root of addiction is really trauma. And the root of, in my opinion, my slightly educated opinion at this point, the root of a lot of mental health struggles is trauma. And so I've kind of made it my career since then to study and learn like therapeutic yoga for trauma, because that was on my path to like heal myself, from the trauma I went through during my addiction, during those abusive relationships, and then also like whatever trauma led to that addiction. I had to figure that out and work through it. And like I said, I did have like a good counselor when I lived in Raleigh, but then when I moved to Asheville, I didn't anymore. That's just an aside, but I continued practicing yoga, studying yoga for trauma. And I was like, I really need to like finish this degree. I shouldn't just let all that go to waste. And so I just looked around, and at UNC Asheville, they had a program called Health and Wellness Promotion. And I was like, sounds good. I was like, sounds like it would go well with yoga. And I didn't know at the time when I signed up for it, just how good it would be. Because UNC Asheville is a liberal arts school. So I also like had to go back and take some liberal arts classes and study like ancient history and stuff, which was really rich. And I enjoyed doing that. But then I also I took anatomy and physiology and stuff that I still use. Like people in my in-person classes are like, wow, I can tell you really know your stuff about the body. And I'm like, yeah, because I've studied the crap out of it. Sorry, I like say bad words a lot.
No, that's fine. No, I love that. So it all worked together.
Yeah.
It all added to the depth of your knowledge.
Yeah. So I ended up, it was very holistic. I studied like not just like nutrition and exercise science, kinesiology, anatomy and physiology, all these things that are very important to know as a yoga teacher that yoga trainings just don't get. They're like, like a lot of yoga trainings don't cover that stuff, and it's really important. And so I ended up getting my degree in that. And I also, not only did I learn that stuff, but I learned a technique called motivational interviewing. So I was a wellness coach there on campus, and I learned about how to kind of help people arrive at solutions for their own life without me telling them what I think they should do. Like helping people. That's what motivational interviewing is about, like helping people find the answer within themselves. So that's kind of been, and I also did undergraduate research on yoga for trauma. And so that's kind of been ever since. I've been studying yoga for trauma. I've been pairing the Eastern and the Western. And then astrology was just an aside along the way. But when I found my way into studying yoga for trauma, I was like, well, I'm going to have to become a yoga therapist. And so I'm doing that training now. That's why I said I can't, like, I'm not a yoga therapist yet. It is a minimum of 4-year long program, can take up to 8 depending. And like, I've missed a couple of the trainings for like childbirth and just life stuff. So I'm taking my time through it. Just like it took me 8 years to get a degree, it might take me a long time to get this yoga therapy training, but I'm in the portion now where I do practicum. So I'm able to see patients, clients for yoga therapy, but I do yoga therapy. I do personalized yoga based on therapeutic techniques, but also based on astrology, just because I enjoy it. I enjoy astrology, and there's a lot of richness to the birth chart as well. And yeah.
You know what I hear in all of this, and I love it? I hear someone who follows her heart.
Mm-hmm.
Like with each step, you're like, well, I'm really interested in this. And you just kept going, and you had such stick-to-itness because you did what you loved. And now it's all coming together. Now,
Totally.
a lot of us don't know what a yoga therapist is. So could you talk just a little more about that?
Yeah, so it's a hefty training, like most. So like I mentioned, my first yoga training was over the course of a year, and that's even drawn out. Like they have ones that you can do within 3 weeks, and they're just super like slap, here's a certificate, you're out there. And it's like more of a calisthenics type, that's why people are critical of gym yoga, because there's a lot of underqualified folks. But anyway, I have opinions about that, and this isn't the venue for that. But so
well, I got to say, just as a very beginning yoga person, I've taken yoga classes here and there, and already I noticed huge difference based on the teacher. Just huge difference. Like you just get this whole other level.
Yeah.
If the teacher's good. So I hear you.
Yeah. And so I try to encourage people, because I teach at the Y now because it's important to me, because the Y yoga in some ways saved my life, so I still teach there. And so I have some folks come through my classes that are like brand new to yoga. And I'm like, hey, if you didn't like my class, I encourage you, or if you did like my class, I still encourage you to try multiple other styles and teachers, because nobody can be the teacher for everybody. And I've just over the years, through more practice and training, I've learned who like I'm just being myself. Like you said, like I'm just being myself. And
yeah, here I am.
I've become very well trained in not taking things personally. So if people don't like my classes, I'm like, okay, I'm not the teacher for you.
I'm not your person. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's fine. And I hope they continue and try out other teachers, because there are teachers that are very different than me. Like I have a podcast I say cuss words on. Like I'm not an airy fairy. Like a lot of yoga teachers are like airy fairies, and they're so sweet and nice. And I'm not. I'm like very brash. Like, I don't know. I'm a goofball. Like I'll make jokes in class, and some people appreciate that and some people don't, but I'm like, I'm not for those people. Anyway, yoga therapy.
It's so good to just be yourself and let people decide. Yeah, that's excellent. You're just offering who you are.
Right. Yeah. And I can't be anybody else. So anyway, yoga therapy, to become a yoga teacher, is 200 hours of training. And that's different than like, college credit hours. Like the average you take like over a whole 4-year degree, it's like 120 credit hours or something, 120 to 130. So it's very different. It's like credit hours are, I don't know, like you take 15 a semester, but for a 200-hour training, that's like the whole 200 hours. You know what I mean? Like I've seen 200-hour trainings offered as like 2 semester, like basically 8 credit hours of college, 8 to 12 credit hours. So the hours are different is what I'm trying to get at, but
okay.
That's like the whole, like the amount of hours you spend in the training is 200. So just to put it in perspective for people that aren't familiar, a yoga therapy training is 800 hours on top of the 200. So you have to have a 200. So by the time you become a yoga therapist, you have a minimum of 1,000 hours of training, most of the time more. Because so I'm almost finished with my 500-hour certificate for yoga training, and then I'll have the 800. So, that's like 1,300 plus all the extra little stuff I've done on the side. So it's a lot of training. Like yoga therapy is a lot of training. It's way more in depth. It's basically you learn lots of yoga practices. And like I kind of alluded to earlier, that it's more than just the asana practice, more than just the hour-long practice you do in a gym or a studio. Although I think there's a place for that. Like there are some people that are like, no, that's not good because yoga is more than that. And I'm like, yeah, no, but 15-year-old me would not have been down with anything more than that. Or like fresh off drugs me, like that's what I needed. And that's what a lot of people need, is that gym class or whatever.
I like that you recognize that. It's an entry point for some people, right?
And some people never go further than that. And that's fine, because it probably still impacts their life in a positive way. And some people, the ones that want to go further than that will, and so we learn all the other sort of limbs of the practice, like the breathing practices, the chanting, the mudras, which are like the hand positions, all this stuff. We learn all like very deep into the philosophy, the ancient Indian Hindu philosophy, Vedic philosophy, from where all of this stuff comes. So we're very deep in that, very steeped in, Indian philosophy, Vedic sciences, Ayurveda, like I mentioned. The training, like none of them, as far as I've seen, incorporate Vedic astrology, but that's just a personal passion project of mine. So I went and did a separate training for that now, so that was born because I was always so interested in astrology. I used to theme my group classes around, it started out with just the new and full moons, and then I just kind of went down the astrology rabbit hole from there, purely for the point of having something new to teach about every week in my yoga classes. And so that's on the list for me to like start teaching other yoga teachers how I do that, how to theme based on astrology. But then also, like right now, the focus is largely on doing astrology readings and yoga therapy for people, this is all a tangent to say what even is yoga therapy.
Yeah.
So we're very steeped in yoga philosophy, but we're also very steeped in, like in these 800-hour trainings, we also learn more in-depth anatomy, which I will say also, I was blessed with a very good college professor of anatomy. So I like really, really learned it at UNC Asheville. But I just think the approach of most yoga teachers to teaching anatomy is like, they might understand it, but understanding something and teaching it well are not the same thing.
Right.
So I encourage I'm like, if you really want to understand anatomy, just go take a college class, like go to a community college or something and take a college class about anatomy. Anyway, so they do include that in the training. So it's kind of a blend, like I was saying, of the Eastern and Western. We have to learn the anatomy. We have to learn all the different ailments people could present with, the different, physicians and traditional allopathic healthcare practitioners. We have to learn, how to communicate with them effectively to be a part of an integrative health team. And then also we're deeply steeped in the yoga practices to bring this holistic element. And so how yoga therapy works, once somebody has all that training and they're ready to start offering yoga therapy, it's typically in 6 to 8 session packages usually. And the first session is an intake session where we go over a very thorough health background that's not only like what you would fill out at the doctor. It includes that kind of information, but we'll also ask about your spiritual practices, your emotional components. Like it's very holistic. I like to say yoga therapy is meant to help, sometimes doctors can't see the forest through the trees. Like all the doctors are very well versed in their very own tree, or like that story where it's all like the blind people and they're like all standing around an elephant.
Piece of the elephant. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that. And the yoga therapy is to help you see the elephant when you've got all the doctors telling you, this is a tail. No, this is an ear. No, this is a trunk, like whatever, and you've got all these doctors running you around doing, there's value in that and what they do and what they're good at. But sometimes we need somebody to help us piece it all together and help us.
I love that idea of combining. Yeah. And being part of that team.
So it's very in-depth training because we have to understand a little about a lot. You know what I mean? We have to understand enough about a lot of different things to help people piece it all together. And when I started on that training a few years ago, I started in 2020, January 2020 is when I started. And I should be finished by end of 2024, early 2025. But so I'm in it right now. I'm deep in it. But when I started that training, I was like, well, I've been theming my practices this whole time based on astrology. I hope to one day offer like astrology, just add that as a component if people want it in their yoga therapy. So that's in the works right now. I offer astrology readings to anyone. Like you can do that virtually. And I'm working on building, because I have just recently reached the practicum portion of my yoga therapy training, meaning I'm eligible to start taking yoga therapy clients under the guidance of my teachers. I'm in the works of building out what that can look like.
So there's so much depth to you, like what, the layers of learning. And I just think I'm so glad you're telling this, because I don't think people understand when they, you're not just a yoga teacher, you're so
Right.
much more. Yeah. There's a whole lot to it. And the training, I had no idea all
Yeah.
those hours.
I think everybody has this much depth. I do. I think it's just not everybody is as much of an open book as I am. I went through a lot of like really hard stuff and embarrassing stuff. And I no longer can be embarrassed. Like I'm not, you know what I mean? Like I've lost
but that's the gift of having those hardships. The gift of it is you have a depth and a compassion for others.
Sure.
There's got to be some upside, right?
Yeah.
And there is. But I mean, also just basically as a yoga teacher, you have so much depth. Like literally your training, I had no idea there was so many hours involved, and I didn't know anything about yoga therapy. So I just think it's cool that you're getting it out there. Like there's a lot more that people can learn and train and
totally go through that. Cause I'm basically in what's like grad school for yoga teachers.
Exactly. Right, that's what it reminds me of.
Like, so I have some peers, people in my peer group that went to college and did that like thing. Like my brother's a year older than me. So we're like friends too. And he's in grad school. And so it's just like, I have people around me in grad school and there's some element of like, well, why aren't you in grad school? You have a degree, you should go to grad school. And I'm like,
you are. Yeah, you are.
Not like, so part of me was like, oh, I should get a physical therapy degree or I should get a master's in social work. And I'm like, maybe one day, because I'm clearly a lifelong learner and I'm patient and I'll keep learning forever. And I don't care how long it takes, like I'm just going to keep studying and whatever. But right now I'm just focusing on the yoga therapy because I'm like, it's kind of a nice combination of both. And maybe one day I'll decide if I want to go the physical therapy route or the actual like therapy route. But right now I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing.
That's great. I think it's so good. I think you found your place. And I do love that you're a lifelong learner because we all benefit from that. Whoever comes in contact with you benefits from the fact that you're always learning.
Well, that's there's a nugget of wisdom in that too for folks is like, just because, like you said earlier, just because I was good at engineering. Yeah. Because I'm super nerdy, but I can apply that nerdiness to something that lights me up a little bit more, basically.
Yeah. I think that's such a good message.
Yeah.
No matter what people are doing, if it doesn't light them up, they've got to find maybe, and I'm not one of those big, like you need to drop your career and find something else. Maybe you will, but can you find a vocation? Can you find a side thing? Can you find something that lights you up? Because it's not, this whole idea of the I don't know if it's trendy anymore, but I was always told like, find your passion, and I never had a single passion. I'm a writer. I'm a generalist. I'm interested in lots of stuff, and I felt like a failure, like, oh, I don't have a passion, Right. I mean, I have some things I'm passionate about, but I think that again, that's Western either or, you're either in your passion or you're not. And that's silly to me. And I don't think your job has to be the end all be all. Like, I really like my job. Is it my passion? Not really, but I really like it. It brings a lot of fulfillment and it supports my family. And, I used to say my passion is my paycheck, getting a paycheck. Yeah. I have a passion for that.
Well, there's a lot of stability in that. And I agree that like, not everybody needs to be entrepreneurs. It's not for everybody. It can be really stressful. And some people it's like, maybe they do it as a side hustle, but there's a lot of stability that comes in having a regular job. And I like to recognize also, this is something I've noticed recently, that like the whole online courses thing is like the new pyramid scheme. Like, I'm just something I've noticed. And I'm like, not everybody needs to quit their job and become a digital course creator or whatever. But
I totally hear you. Yeah.
This notion that if you're passionate about something, you should like pursue it as your income. And for some people, that takes the passion out of it for them.
And people need a certain personality and grit to be an entrepreneur. I've always been attracted to it. I love talking to entrepreneurs. Yeah. But I don't know if I would have made it through, like, well, now I do this on top of my full-time job and I'm really happy with the combo. Yeah. Everybody's, again, I'm always saying this and it's so trite, but it's so true. Everyone has to find their own way.
Yes.
Nobody, it's like N equals 1. Nobody is, I can't tell you what to do. And I used to tell people what to do. It's like, it doesn't work so great, or just because I take a supplement that works for me, it doesn't mean it'll work for you. And you have
Right.
to remember that each person has their own path and
Mm-hmm.
their own time. Timing is really everything
Mm-hmm.
too. Like I noticed my trajectory was so different from others because I had kids so late. It just
Yeah.
changes everything.
Yeah.
And my career was like up front.
Yeah.
Um, and now I'm older and I'm enjoying this. So everybody will find their own
Right.
way.
Totally. And there's people like me who had children. I was 25 and 28 when my kids were born. And I'm over here like envious of my friends who don't have kids and they're like killing it in their career. And I'm like, I wish, but really like I am, it's just harder for me, it's just a little different.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
had to find my own way, but that just to tie it all back in too, that's like why I love astrology is because there's no like, I got a degree in health and wellness. Like part of what I do is wellness coaching. I could have gotten a certification as a wellness coach. I just didn't because I have all this yoga certification. I was like, that's a waste of money for me. I'm down the yoga thing. But so like I've done all this training about wellness coaching, and a lot of in the wellness coaching world, they tell you to like specialize and pick an ideal client and help one set of people with one issue. And I'm like, no, that's yoga therapy, and astrology is holistic in that I don't need to be good at one thing. I'm good at helping people look at their birth chart, their whatever elements they have going on in their life through the yoga therapy, through the astrology to see what their, to use yoga words, their karmas, their dharma,
Yeah.
and they've been dealt and their life path, and help sort that out. Cause I had to sort that out too, and that's where the passion came for me, like finding my own dharma.
That's so cool. Each person's unique, and that's what excites you. You're not I'm going to specialize in this one narrow thing. I want to find out about each person who's unique.
Yeah, nobody wants to be put in a box either. But that's actually, with astrology, it's like it helps us compartmentalize in such a way that like feels it's almost like meditation, like you put your thoughts that you make your thoughts separate from you
Yeah.
during
Yeah.
meditation so that you're able to be a witness to them rather than
Right. That's very powerful. You have
Yeah.
to go soon, right?
Oh, yeah, ish.
Okay. Well, I'm feeling like, in a little while down the road, there's a part 2 here.
Okay.
Because you've got a lot of good stuff to share with us.
Well,
But
thanks.
I just want to thank you just for, being authentic and sharing so much of your journey. You never know who it's going to help. I really appreciate your time because it's very powerful when people hear what someone else did with their, with everything, with their ups, their downs. And here you are. I'm amazed at all that you do. I wish I lived closer so I could go to your yoga class at the Y. Yeah. And I wish you all the luck. It sounds great to me.
Yeah.
Your combination of things. Me. Yeah, it's really good. Thanks for reaching out. And yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Storied Human. And thanks again to Rose Holbrook for sharing so much of her story and herself today. You can get in touch with Rose at yogiscopes.com. And she has a free birth chart decoder that you can sign up for. And you can also do your chart remotely with her. You don't have to be in Asheville to do it. So definitely check that out. And thanks again for listening to The Storied Human.